So now that I've flipped some of my normals, and I might have missed a few, but I think I got everything facing the right direction, I want to talk about the daylight system and a few other things. One thing is that you're going to put some trees into your model, and unless you go out and find some good ones, this one seems like it's a little bit too high up. I'm going to drop it into the ground a little bit so it's not quite so high. But we're going to talk about trees in class a little bit, so it's just a reminder that the place that you would get those trees is kind of an odd place. It's under the create menu, which is typically going to be something like standard primitives and spheres and stuff. So when you're in create for geometry, or you can create shapes and other things, once you're in geometry, you drop down and you go to what's called AEC Extended. It's Architectural Engineering Collection or something like that. And you used to have automatic tools to make railings and walls. But one of the things that's nice, it's kind of a leftover vestige from back those days of earlier versions of Max, is that you do have some of these different foliage elements that you can select. They're not the greatest, but that's what I've put in here, and we'll see that they'll work well enough for what we're trying to do. And in class, we'll talk about how to manage and edit those elements. But I've got the trees in there. Just want to remind you where they are. I get a question about that all the time. And now we're going to go ahead and start to put in a daylight system. We're going to put in a mental ray daylight system, and I've already done a few renderings, so I'm convinced that mental ray is the assigned renderer. But if you don't have mental ray assigned, you need to go to your render setup, or if you're not sure, and under common at the very bottom of the common tab in the render setup, it actually says NVIDIA Mental Ray, which tells me I'm there. But you can assign your render, and the production render right now is assigned to Mental Ray. There's other options, and obviously if you're in Mental Ray, it's not an option to change it to that. But I just wanted to make sure I was going in the right direction. I want to make a Mental Ray rendering a Mental Ray daylight system, so I want to be in Mental Ray. So I'm going to go back to the Create menu, and I was looking at plants a minute ago, and I'm going to go down to Systems. Now a lot of people get confused. Where's the daylight system? It is a system. It's not in the lights. You can look in the lights and you can see that there's some sort of a mental ray sky portal, which we'll talk about later in the semester. But there's no actual daylight system in the lighting. You've got to go to Systems and select Daylight. Notice when we select daylight, it starts to give us a warning right now, and it's something to pay attention to because one that we're going to need to talk about now is the exposure control. We talked earlier in class about exposure control, and I'm not going to go deeply into what it does other than the fact that it adjusts for the really bright settings of the daylight system. And you'll notice that since exposure control wasn't set, it's telling me that it's going to go ahead and set them to a starting point of an exposure value in mental ray photographic exposure control to EV equals 15. And I'm going to tell it go ahead and do that because that's probably a good place to start. Now I'm actually in the command for creating the daylight system. You'll notice that it's punched in and it's green, and I'm going to kind of scroll out without actually using my left button because the minute I click my left button, you'll see I'm going to hold it down. So I'm going to click and hold the left button, and as I drag out, I start to see this compass rose. And I just make it big enough to where I can actually tell what it's doing. And as soon as I let go of that compass rose, I'm going to be creating my sunlight, my daylight system. But because I haven't actually done it before, and I don't have an MR Sky, the mental ray physical sky map assigned to the system, it tells me that's another step that we're going to need to have to use the daylight system. So I tell it, yes, that's fine, put it in there for me. I can turn it off later if I don't want it. And as soon as I do that, then you can see I'm dragging my sun up and down. Now, if you look in the lower left-hand corner in the left view, you'll see how as I drag down, it gets higher and higher. That's what we call the orbital scale. It doesn't matter where it is. It could be anywhere in your scene. But the orbital scale helps you see it. So if you go too high, you'll never be able to figure the angle. So just get it enough above the building. There we go. So that it's close enough to where you can really tell the sun angle. Maybe if I zoom out a little bit now, I can really see where the sun is coming from. So we see in this view, it's kind of straight up down, and here it's coming from this direction, which actually is pretty good. We can see here too, it's kind of going in this direction, so it's going to put some light on my building. We need to think about when we put it in, what is the setting of the daylight system? What time is it in? And since we are in the daylight system, we have to be careful. If I start clicking again, I'm going to make a second daylight system. So I will uncheck this and say, I don't want to make any more daylight systems, or I'll go to select, make sure that that is not hit anymore. We're not making daylight systems, and I'll go to the modify tab because right now system I just made is still selected. And we notice it made a mental ray sun and a mental ray sky, which is what we want. And we'll go into the setup. I mean, there's some parameters here we won't mess with right now, but we'll go into the setup and we'll see the time of the day that it put it in there. And it put it in at noon on the longest day of the year, the summer solstice, June 21st. And it put it in this year, and it doesn't really know where we are, so we can get the location. We can see that it's in San Francisco because that's where Autodesk's corporate headquarters are. And we can say, you know what, we want to be in Austin, Texas, and tell it okay. All that does is change the latitude and the longitude, but it knows at any given day of the year, at any given time, where the sun is going to be. And as you notice, I can kind of change the time of day, and as I change it, the sun moves. So I am actually on the south side of the building in the summer, so the sun's going to come up from the backside and arc around this building. So if I change it to a different month, then notice in the morning it's in a different location. So you got to kind of get used to where the sun angles are. I'm going to stay in the morning, and I'm going to go maybe to uh, something a little bit later in the year, so I can make sure we have a low sun angle, and then we can see up here in the top view as I go through the day where it goes. So actually, let me go ahead and get some good sun on there. I'm going to go a little bit opposite of where my camera's coming from, and I'll click in here, and I'll go ahead and make a rendering. So as soon as I hit render, I see it, instead of a black sky anymore, I'm going to have a whole lot of things going on. It's going to take a little while, but I have this gradient sky. That's the mental ray physical sky. And we can see that there's a whole different look now to my model now that the daylight system is in there. So I paused the video while it was finished rendering, and it took a few minutes to render this scene. And obviously I don't have any materials assigned yet. The glass surfaces are not transparent. The mesh that'll be up here on the parapet wall, kind of screening there, is obviously not see-through yet either. I haven't really applied anything. A couple materials came with these trees. But the point is that we got the daylight system in, and we're going to talk about a few things like the horizon line here, the mental ray physical sky, the exposure control settings in the next little video tutorial. I just want to do one more thing with the daylight system. Let's say that you want to render this thing from the back side. So we come in here and we say, well, what if we are all the way around here on the back side of the building? So now we want to render it from over here, but and I move my camera, get a little bit closer in here, say, okay, let's render this scene. And before I even let it get too far into this rendering, we'll see that it is going to be on the side of the building that really doesn't have any direct light on it because the light is coming from the south side of the building. Now it's okay to do a rendering like this. We can see a little bit of highlight. The light's going to actually render here on the other sides. But if we want to actually light it from the side we're looking at it, then we want to go ahead and cancel this rendering and think about how we change that in the sunlight system. So think about the daylight system and what we're looking at here. We've got this compass rose, and it gets bigger and bigger no matter where I go with it. But let me grab that compass and let me shrink it down. So I thought I scaled it very good earlier, but obviously I did not. So we'll make it smaller. We can see that there's the north and the south and the east and the west, and the sun is going to track across the southern sky. But I want the sun to track in the northern sky for me. So all I need to do is either take the compass and use the rotate command, which I can do, or if I go into the daylight system again, or the compass, it's all tied together. But notice if I scroll out a little bit here and find where's my daylight system? I guess I'm in the compass, so I need to get back to select, and I can actually see, there's my daylight system right there. Select the daylight system, go to the modified panel, go back into the setup, and we'll notice that we have an actual north direction. Remember the orbital scale? That's so we can actually make it a little bit taller so we can find it. I had a little bit of trouble there finding it to select it. And the north direction, I can actually move that too. So notice if I rotate the north direction all the way around about 180 degrees or so, or even just type 180 in here to get it straight up north to south, now my sun's coming from the other side, and if I make this rendering here on the back side, I'll see that I've actually got some natural light coming from the other direction. So you can move the north direction so it's appropriate with the direction you're shooting your model from, or if you want to get an exact rendering of exactly where the sun's going to be on your model, then you need to align the north direction with the actual north direction of the project that you're working with. So that is the daylight system, and hopefully you can get in there and make your own daylight system. Drop it in. Notice that there's some things going on this back lot. We got some normals that aren't doing what they're supposed to, but I'm going to ignore that. And I think we've touched the important concepts on making a daylight system. And next we'll talk about exposure control and the mental ray physical sky and some of the components in it, like this horizon line, which is way too high